Jazz was brought to the U.S. and developed by performers in streets, bars, brothels, and dance halls of New Orleans. Jazz was a blend of West African, American, and European music. The influences from West Africa were the drumming, improvising, percussive sounds, complex rhythms, and the phrase known as call and response. This is when a voice is answered by a chorus or an instrument.
In America, the blacks were a major influence on jazz, with things such as work songs and gospel hymns. But this was all originated from the whites from America and Europe. Their musical cultures in the 19th century gave melodies and harmonies to the idea. Another major influence on jazz was bands. They practically played everywhere. There are many different styles of jazz, such as New Orleans style, swing, bebop, blues, and ragtime.
Jazz's main part is the rhythm section, which plays and holds the beat and adds rhythm and harmonies. When you see jazz, it is played either with a band with 10 to 15 people or a small group with 3 to 8. The solo instrument is usually a cornet, trumpet, saxophone, piano, clarinet, vibraphone, and trombone.
Jazz is spontaneous and original. They improvise a lot, usually in theme and variations form. Some are similar to the theme, but some are so different that you can't even recognize the theme. To get that jazz sound, a person must stray from the notes a bit.
The musicians that jazz produced and the music itself have become worldwide and made such a great impact to all preceding generations.
Heard that song before. That's Maple Leaf Rag by Scott Joplin. He was a ragtime composer. Now, it's not very easy to define ragtime, as it is considered the first completely American music. Like jazz, another distinctly American musical art form, ragtime's composers and admirers each see its boundaries a little bit differently. However, these groups generally agree on and stand by a precise definition. That is, ragtime, a genre of musical compositions for piano, generally in duple meter and containing a highly syncopated treble lead over a rhythmically steady bass. Now, a ragtime composition is usually composed 3 or 4 contrasting sections or strains, each one being 16 or 32 measures in length. This definition describes much of the music or the pianists who traveled the South and Midwest and eventually congregated in Missouri to produce a core of ragtime compositions. These composers include Scott Joplin, Charles Hunter, Thomas Turpin, Louis Chauvin, Charles L. Johnson, and many others. Now, structured in a way similar to the march, ragtime's use of syncopation is largely what distinguishes it. Its rhythms made it lively and springy, and therefore ideal for dancing. Its name is believed to be a contraction of the term ragged time, which refers to its rhythmically broken up melodies. It was usually written in 2/4 or 4/4 time with a predominant left-hand pattern of bass notes on strong beats, beats 1 and 3, and chords on weak beats, beats 2 and 4, accompanying a syncopated melody in the right hand. According to some sources, the name ragtime may come from the ragged or syncopated rhythm of the right hand. A rag written in 3/4 time is a ragtime waltz. Ragtime is not a time or meter in the same sense that march time is 2/4 meter and waltz time is 3/4 meter. It is rather a musical genre that uses an effect that can be applied to any meter. Ragtime developed in African American communities throughout the western parts of the Midwest, particularly Missouri. Bands would combine the structure of marches with black songs and dances such as the cakewalk. The music, which predated the explosion of sound recordings, became widespread through the sale of published sheet music and piano rolls. In this way, it contrasts sharply from early jazz, which was spread by recordings and live performances. Ragtime pieces came in a number of different styles during the years of its popularity and appeared under a name of different descriptive names such as cakewalk, two-step, slow drag, coon song, ragtime song, folk ragtime, and many more. Ragtime was everywhere by the 1900s, in sheet music, piano rolls, phonograph records, and ragtime piano playing contests, as well as in music boxes, vaudeville theaters, and bordellos. Publishing houses churned out piano rags and ragtime songs at a furious pace. Ragtime also appeared in arrangements for orchestras and wind bands. Ragtime is a catch-all name for syncopated popular music, remained popular through the 1910s. Ragtime's popularity faded around 1970 with the rise of another catch-all term, jazz, used to describe peppy, noisy, popular music. Note that musicians active in New Orleans during the early 1900s, who were later recognized as jazz musicians, frequently, if not always, referred to the hot music they played as ragtime. It can be stated categorically, however, that the ragtime music of Joplin, Joseph Lamb, James Scott, and others had become nearly forgotten by 1920. Although ragtime was not a big attraction during the 1930s and 40s, it was still played, and not just by pianists. Oftentimes, a dance band recorded an up-to-date swing version of the Maple Leaf Rag. And during the 1950s, ragtime was the theme of many record albums. Ragtime was frequently played on pianos, especially rigged to sound out of tune or perhaps with thumbtacks in the hammers to evoke the sound of old-time saloon pianos. Despite such comical treatments, ragtime began to be heard with more frequency and respect than it had been in 3 decades. In 1970, ragtime experienced a huge renaissance. No Such Records was the first classical label to issue an album of ragtime, Piano Rags by Scott Joplin, performed by composer, conductor, and musologist Joshua Rifkin, created a sensation and quickly became a bestseller. In 1974, motion picture The Sting introduced the widest audience yet to the music of Scott Joplin. Although the choice of Joplin's music for a story set in the 1930s was historically inaccurate, the music underscored and supported the action on the screen perfectly. As a result, Joplin's The Entertainer went to the top of the pop record charts. Since the 1970s and the renaissance of ragtime, there has been a great deal of activity in the areas of live performance, festivals, and scholarships in the field. Ragtime, like any other music, must be heard and really cannot be defined by words, just as words cannot be defined by music. But through more than 100 years, ragtime has had no trouble making its presence known, and its composers, performers, and admirers all look forward to its future.
Why, hello there. When you think of blues, you think about misfortune, betrayal, and regret. You lose your job, you get the blues. Your mate falls out of love with you, you get the blues. Your dog dies, you get the blues. While blues lyrics often deal with personal adversity, the music itself goes far beyond self-pity. The blues is also about overcoming hard luck, saying what you feel, ridding yourself of frustration, letting your hair down, and simply having fun. The best blues is visceral, cathartic, and starkly emotional. From unbridled joy to deep sadness, no form of music communicates more genuine emotion.
One day,
Now let's explore the history of blues. The blues has deep roots in American history, particularly African American history. The blues originated on southern plantations in the 19th century. Its innovators were slaves, ex-slaves, and the descendants of slaves. African American sharecroppers who sang as they toiled in the cotton and vegetable fields. It's generally accepted that the music evolved from African spirituals, African chants, work songs, field hollers, rural life, and drum music, revivalist hymns, and country dance music. The blues grew up in the Mississippi Delta just upriver from New Orleans, the birthplace of jazz. Blues and jazz have always influenced each other, and they still interact in countless ways today. Unlike jazz, the blues didn't spread out significantly from the South to the Midwest until the 1930s and 40s. Once the Delta blues made their way up the Mississippi to urban areas, the music evolved into electrified Chicago blues, other regional blues styles, and various jazz blues hybrids. A decade or so later, the blues gave birth to the rhythm and blues and rock and roll. No single person invented the blues, but many people claim to have discovered the genre. For instance, minstrel show bandleader W.C. Handy insisted that the blues were revealed to him in 1903 by an itinerant street guitarist at a train station in Tutwiler, Mississippi. During the middle to late 1800s, the Deep South was home to hundreds of seminal bluesmen who helped shape the music. Unfortunately, much of this original music followed these sharecroppers to their graves, but the legacy of these earliest blues pioneers can still be heard in the 1920s and 30s recordings from Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas, Georgia, and other southern states. This music is not very far removed from the field hollers and work songs of the slaves and sharecroppers. Many of the earliest blues musicians incorporated the blues into a wider repertoire that included traditional folk music, vaudeville music, and minstrel tunes.
Ain't nobody's business.
Without getting too technical, most blues music is comprised of 12 bars. A specific series of notes is also utilized in the blues. The individual parts of the scale are known as blue notes. Well-known blues pioneers from the 1920s such as Son House, Blind Lemon Jefferson, Leadbelly, Charlie Patton, and Robert Johnson usually performed solo with just a guitar. Occasionally they teamed up with one or more fellow bluesmen to perform in the plantation camps, rural juke joints, and rambling shacks of the Deep South. Blues bands may have evolved from early jazz bands, gospel choirs, and jug bands. Jug band music was popular in the South. Early jug bands variously featured jugs, guitars, mandolins, banjos, kazoos, string basses, harmonicas, fiddles, washboards, and everyday appliances converted into crude instruments. When the country blues moved to the cities and other locales, it took on various regional characteristics, hence the St. Louis blues, the Memphis blues, the Louisiana blues, etc. Chicago bluesmen such as John Lee Hooker and Muddy Waters were the first to electrify the blues and add drums to the piano in the late 1940s. A general term that describes the rural blues of the Mississippi Delta, the Piedmont, and other rural locals. A piano-based blues popularized by Meade Lux Lewis, Albert Ammons, and Pete Johnson, and derived from barrel house and ragtime. What is blues? Blues is a starkly emotional category of jazz that lets one reflect and express their deep emotions.
Hello there. Let me tell you about New Orleans style jazz. From the 1900s to the 1917, jazz had an uprise in the American city of New Orleans. The city was filled with different races and cultures, thus it was reflected in the music. New Orleans style jazz is also known as Dixieland because of the Dixieland Jazz Band, who was the first to actually be recorded. Musicians played in a red light district called Storyville. They would play in bars and brothels all in the street. Storyville was the hottest place to be in New Orleans. All the musicians wanted to play there. They loved the atmosphere where they felt free to play how they wanted and improvise how they wanted. New Orleans style jazz was played by groups of 5 to 8 people. The melodic instruments, which were the trumpet, trombone, and clarinet, were known as the front line. Variations of the melody was played by the trumpet. Counter to the melody was done by the clarinet, and the simple bass line was played by the trombone. All of this together produced a polyphonic texture. It was then supported by the rhythm section, which was the drums, guitar or banjo, piano, plucked bass, and tuba. Sometimes individual performers would improvise solos and be accompanied by the whole band or just the rhythm section. The unaccompanied solos were called breaks. Bands in New Orleans were huge. They had dance bands and marching bands. They were often made up of African American and European American people. They would even have competitions to see whose band was better. They would even march to funerals playing jazz. These were called jazz funerals.
This is where the blues is
3
born.
well-known artists of New Orleans style jazz are Ferdinand Jelly Roll Morton, Joseph King Oliver, and Louis Armstrong. Louis Armstrong had a huge impact on jazz. He was born in New Orleans and grew up learning how to play the cornet. King Oliver even gave him lessons. He then joined the band Kid Ory Band. Then he joined King Oliver's band. But then he started his own. Louis Armstrong's Hot 5 and Louis Armstrong's Hot 7. He was one of the greatest improvisers in jazz. New Orleans is said to be the birthplace of jazz. With much creativity, freedom, and improvisation running through the bars, brothels, dance halls, and streets, New Orleans was the place to be and the place to make music. Storyville was eventually shut down in 1917, and all the musicians moved to Chicago, Kansas City, and New York to continue performing jazz music. To jazz!
To jazz.
Let's swing into swing. Swing is a type of popular jazz that is defined by the use of big bands and dancing beat to make an upbeat dancing atmosphere. This type of jazz was popularized by men like Charlie Johnson, Fletcher Henderson, and the McKinley Cotton Pickers of the 1920s. This music caught on like wildfire, spreading all across America via radio and recording deals. Soon, New York became the swing capital of the world. Swing was made possible by the creation of a new mode of jazz. Big band jazz was made popular by the 1920s and was swing's main vehicle of production. Big bands were made using odd-numbered players, 5, 7, 9, 11, etc. With the invention of big band, jazz went from improvised polyphony to homophony of big bands. Soon, swing spread farther than New York record deals and expanded to live shows of groups from all over the country. With jazz's acceptance of all races, soon every town in the Deep South, with over 60,000 African Americans, had its own important band. By the 1930s, swing had listeners internationally, with bands from the U.S. having the support of major companies like Esquire and Coca-Cola, and radio shows like Camel Hit Parade, Chesterfield 4, Philip Morris Show, and the Coca-Cola Spotlight Series. There are well over 330 swing bands, but a couple are the Kansas City 7, the Grammarly 5, the Nat Cole Trio, Coleman Hawkins, and the Club of France. By the Second World War, swing was beginning to die out. A combination of the draft, transportation and fuel shortages, midnight curfew, 20% amusement tax, and the raise of salaries made the golden age of swing jazz come to an end. The era of swing jazz, with its peppy rhythm and big band sound, is truly a purely American sound that not even World War II could end.
Tell you about bebop. Bebop or bop is a style of jazz developed in the early to mid-1940s in the United States, which features songs characterized by a fast tempo, complex chord progressions with rapid chord changes, and numerous changes of key, instrumental virtuosity, and improvisation based on a combination of harmonic structure, the use of scales, and occasional references to the melody.
Bebop developed as the younger generation of jazz musicians expanded the creative possibilities of jazz beyond the popular, dance-oriented swing style with a new musician's music that was not as danceable and demanded close listening. As bebop was not intended for dancing, it enabled the musicians to play at faster tempos. Bebop musicians explored advanced harmonies, complex syncopation, altered chords, extended chords, chord substitutions, asymmetrical phrasing, and intricate melodies. Bebop groups used rhythm sections in a way that expanded their role, whereas the key ensemble of the swing era was the big band, of up to 14 pieces playing an ensemble-based style. The classic bebop group was a small combo that consisted of a saxophone, a tenor or alto, trumpet, piano, double bass, and drums, playing music in which the ensemble played a supportive role for soloists. Rather than play heavily arranged music, bebop musicians typically played the melody of a song with the accompaniment of the rhythm section, followed by a section in which all of the performers improvised solos, then returned to the melody at the end of the song.
Bebop was a style of music developed primarily by Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie. Instead of big bands, musicians tended to form smaller ensembles. The focus was on the soloist, who took extended solos showcasing their virtuosity and harmonic knowledge. As jazz fell out of favor with popular audiences, bebop pushed the music into a more intellectual vein and perhaps marked jazz's crossover from pop music to art music.
Bebop was a rebellion by creative improvisers against the commercialism and written arrangements of signed bands. The new music was meant for attentive listening, not dancing, and its sophisticated harmonies and unpredictable rhythms bewildered many listeners. The role of rhythm instruments in bebop was different from that in earlier days. For example, the bass drums no longer marked the beat that was reserved for occasional irregular accents called bombs. Similarly, the pianist's left hand had no longer helped emphasize the basic pulse, but joined with the right hand to play complex chords at irregular intervals. Both hands were needed to perform bebop's dense chord structures. The beat then was marked mainly by the pizzicato bass and the ride cymbal.
With focus on improvisation, bebop allowed for an explosion of innovation. Inspired by the more harmonic and rhythmic experimental players in swing era, such as Coleman Hawkins and Roy Eldridge, bebop expanded the palette of musical devices from which to choose while improvising.
Get me a cherry roasted bourbon smash.
What kind of music is this?
It's electronic. It's the music of the future.
This is a jazz bar. We only play jazz in here. Play it ragtime or something.
Play New Orleans.
This is my bar and we play swing here.
Blues.
Play swing in this bar.
Ragtime. We play ragtime's the best. Ragtime. No, ragtime. We play ragtime.
Play New
No,
Orleans.
why are we playing ragtime?
Your mom's calling you.
You probably are.
How funny would that be if Rachel just holding this?
Literally, I just have it in there. Watch out, though.
What are you doing?
Look, it's like.
That's cute.
Get out of here.
It's nice.
Without getting too technical, most views.
What do you think about that?
Rachel, that's your cue.
Rachel, you have to say it louder than that.
This is too loud.
Yeah, it's really good. Kind of break stuff when I call
Make sure we get it like cut the music into his music.
with an actual glass ball.
Take
Oh,
one.
okay, Zach.
Aaron, what are your thoughts?
I'm nervous to get hit with a bottle.
Aaron, it's gonna be fun.
This is take 2 of the bar fight. Feeling ready.
Ah, good alcohol. Ah.
It's not shit.
Yeah, it's good, right?
That's right.
Come on, you just gotta get into it. Rachel.
Oh my god.
We'll figure it
Just do it.
You look like a goat.
Okay.
Grab.
Like
you're
that.
So Rachel, as soon as
When I start to come up.
Okay, go.
can I just
Oh, fluff, fluff. Judge, judge.